Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as the House knows, the purpose of the committee stages, if David Bennett wants to cease his inane interjections across the House, I'll continue. The purpose of the committee stages of the bill is to get the Minister in the chair to answer questions about what the bill will actually do. And we've had a series of very laid-back ministers in the chair, and this one's no exception. And I'd like to see the Minister take the call, because I think there are a lot of questions that are serious questions that need answers about this bill. And in particular, Minister, I want to ask you about the utility of this bill in achieving the objectives of better public services, because the Minister, in the report back stage of this bill, the second reading, said that the changes, quote, are designed to enable the delivery of better public services and more effective and efficient achievement of results. And he went on to say that the Better Public Services program was one of the 4 key priorities of the government. Well, I have in my hand a document that I've received under the Official Information Act, which is the Ernst & Young report, and it's entitled Final Draft Better Public Services Program, Independent Quality Assurance. And it's dated December last year, so it's 6 months old. And the summary of Ernst & Young, well, it's officially leaked, this one, because the government had to give it out when it was requested. But this is a document that is designed to test to see if the public service, the state sector, is delivering better public services and the government is achieving the goal of its program. And what does it say? And I want to quote this one sentence. It says, our assessment is that the program has yet to develop critical elements that are fundamental and necessary to achieve its aims. You know what that means? It means that the Better Public Services Program, Minister, one of the flagships of the national government, has so far failed. It's so far failed. And it gives the reasons for this. And I want to summarise the reasons. They've got them as 3. It lacks ownership, leadership, formal accountability and prioritisation. Well, now that's a responsibility, surely, Minister, of the Minister of State Services and as Chief Executive. Secondly, it says the program does not yet have explicit and widely agreed model or strategy for achieving change. You've got a key goal of a government department and there's no strategy to achieve it. This is what they paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to Ernst & Young to tell them. Well, Minister, why is it that you don't have a strategy to achieve it? And will this bill actually help deliver that outcome? And the third thing's important too. It says that the program doesn't have sufficient resources allocated. Well, that's a budgetary function of government. So we've got an official analysis of the better public services that the Minister said this bill is designed and the government is committed to achieving, and it's not achieving them because it lacks leadership, it lacks strategy and it lacks resources. So I'd like the Minister to tell the House how this bill will turn that around. This is a key goal of the government. It is not being achieved. That's what the report says, and I'm happy to give you a copy. I'll table it for you if you'd like, Minister. I presume you've read it. It says that you're not succeeding on those goals. So, firstly, how are you going to turn around those factors? Because I don't believe the legislation before us address any of those factors in terms of making sure that we achieve the better public service goals that the government uses rhetoric about but fails to deliver on in terms of leadership, strategy or resources. Then I want to look at the changes, the amendments to the State Sector Act that we are examining right now. And the first change says that that's going to strengthen the role of the State Services Commissioner in leading the state services. Well, I'd like to ask the Minister whether strengthening the role of the State Services Commissioner will help overcome what the ministerial inquiry found into the NovaPay debacle. Because what did they find? They found, first of all, that it was a debacle, that teachers weren't getting their salaries and pay paid correctly 6 months after it was introduced. It said the cost of the program had doubled, another $23 million, it said all of this was avoidable, and it said that the government had ignored the lessons, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, the government had ignored the lessons of the past. In 1996, the education payroll had similar difficulties. Here, less than 10 years later, well, actually more than 10 years later, 16 years later, we've got the same thing again. But the INSIS experience that cost $100 million of money put into the police was a parallel case. And Stephen Joyce said this was the result of failure of leadership of the State Services Commission. So I would like to ask the Minister how the provisions put in this bill might have turned around the Novapay debacle. Could that have been prevented with the provisions in this bill? If not, what is the government doing to make sure that we do have an efficient public service and not one that results in a debacle such as we saw with Novapay? And then secondly, of the changes made, it said broadening the Commissioner's functions to include the ability to transfer chief executives. Well, I want to stay with Education, Minister, and use another example and ask you how the Act would have applied in this case. Leslie Longstone left after a year in the job at the expense of $425,000 in costs to the taxpayer. And she left essentially, if you read between the lines, because she couldn't get on with her minister. So would it have been the case under this bill, if this bill had been enacted before that event, that we could have, because Hekia Parata is apparently a very hard minister to work for. Nobody was saying that Leslie Longstone was incompetent in the job. In fact, the minister refused to say that, Minister of State Services. Would you be able, where you've got an incompetent minister that's hard to work with, transfer the chief executive to another department so the taxpayer's not paying over $400,000 to get rid of somebody that you've just put in the job? So we have done that in the past. Well, it has been done in the past, but this gives an explicit power to the chief executive to transfer. Now, the next one is extending the responsibilities of chief executives to their ministers. That's what the bill says. It's the third change. Now, if there is a responsibility on the part of the chief executive to the minister, I hope you're listening, Minister, is there a counter responsibility of the minister to the chief executive? Because as long as I'd been a minister, there was always a strong convention that ministers didn't go out and bag their chief executives. And yet we saw Murray McCully bag John Allen. You know, we know that Murray McCully was behind the change program. It got unpopular, so he bagged John Allen and said you got it wrong, even though John Allen was carrying out all of his responsibilities. So if this bill creates a responsibility of the chief executive to the minister, what responsibility does it create of the minister back to the chief executive? Is it permissible under this bill for a minister to go out and bag his chief executive who can't reply, who is defenceless and who can be slandered by his minister and forced to take the responsibility? And, you know, if that was an isolated example, I'd feel more comfortable, Minister, but clearly it isn't. Because Nathan Guy, the House will recall, did exactly the same thing. Nathan Guy was responsible for meat exports sitting on the wharves in China for 3 weeks at a loss of millions and millions of dollars because they got it wrong. The government restructured the Ministry of Primary Industries. It did away with the Food Safety Authority that worked very effectively, and we jeopardised our trade in meat with China, which has doubled in the last year. Now, I want to know why it is that a minister can go out again and bag his department but not take responsibility himself. So is this bill one-sided in creating a responsibility on the part of the chief executive to the minister, but taking away the responsibility of the minister to the chief executive, or in fact taking away the responsibility of the minister to be responsible and to actually earn the $250,000 that they earn each year by actually doing their job and not sitting back waiting for the civil service to do it and then blaming them when they don't? So that's the third question, Minister, and if you're having trouble following these, they're all set out in the bill, one by one, the changes that are being made. Now, one of the other changes is about creating a new organisational arrangement called a departmental agency, as a way of providing public services. This sits in a host department and would administer the appropriations used by the departmental agency, but it would have its own chief executive. Can the Minister give the House... Mr Chairman?
I call the honourable member Chris Farfui.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair.